Welcome to Covered. CTV has teamed up with website Rebuild Christchurch to give you a behind-the-scenes look at the residential rebuild in Canterbury. Over the next 12 programs, we're going to be looking at how things are progressing post-quake. We're going to talk to the leaders, experts and people involved to get the answers that you want on the rebuild and other insurance matters. In today's program, I'll be joined by the two leaders of the Canterbury residential rebuild effort. Collectively, their organisations and members have settled $21 billion worth in Canterbury earthquake insurance claims. And each week we'll be examining different repair methods for you, what's involved and how it works. As many of us in Canterbury with damaged homes now know, the first task for a building professional or engineer is to assess the extent of damage to your home's foundations and whether your foundations can be re-levelled, repaired or rebuilt. Today we'll be looking at re-levelling and exactly what's involved. Welcome to Ian Simpson, Chief Executive of the Earthquake Commission, and Tim Grafton, Chief Executive of the Insurance Council, to Covered. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure.
In September 2014, it was the 4th anniversary of the first series of earthquakes that has indelibly changed the lives of thousands of Cantabrians and, of course, the city that we also call home. Insurance has been vital to the residential rebuild, and EQC has paid out around $8 billion in claims, and private insurers over $13 billion. That's for residential and commercial. So I want to start by taking a look back at the last 4 years, particularly at the challenges. What went wrong, what went right, and perhaps what we could have done differently. So can I start with you first, Ian, if that's all right? With EQC, you really had to just start from a standing still position.
That's right.
Yeah. Looking back today, what would you have done differently if you'd known what was coming up?
Oh, where do we start?
It's that old hindsight question,
Absolutely.
I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I guess there are a couple of major areas where we know a lot more now about how our cover works. Because of the multiple events in Christchurch and the types of land damage we've seen, there's a whole range of ways that our cover's been tested in ways it's never been tested before. So the first one would be apportionment. You know, we never had something called apportionment before the Christchurch earthquake. So how are we going to be building that into our systems going forward? You know, the land damage, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, the new types of land damage that we're seeing. So there's some very basic lessons about we have more information. We've now experienced something that we've never seen before that we can start to build into our new approach. And this is not something that's a theoretical conversation. As we speak now, we are designing and building for the future EQC that will be better enabled to respond to a future event based on what we've learnt in Canterbury. So, you know, we're building and designing new systems. We need systems that are far more transparent, systems that understand things like apportionment, that people can look and see into to see how their claim's progressing, and they get a bit of feel for what the next step is and how long it might take. So recognising we need to be able to just be more transparent about those processes. I
think apportionment has been one of those dirty words, you know, over the time, and certainly you have had to run the gauntlet of media as well. Within the EQC organisation, what would you have changed structurally from, you know, if you were starting again?
Well, there are, I think first of all, we probably would have, earlier in the piece, built more of the infrastructure around the organisation. So all our plans were around getting frontline staff into the field and assessing houses and starting that work right from day one. And they did a fantastic job. I mean, the reason we know so much and we're in such a good position now is because of the work they did. However, we didn't have the payroll systems or the HR or all the policy support that a big organisation needs.
Yeah, of course.
And that was partly because our response was designed around one large earthquake. So the response was supposed to be, we have an earthquake, we grow really big, we assess all the damage, we pay lots of claims, and then we shrink. So we're there for 6 months. Whereas, of course, it's now 4 years plus later, and we're still a big organisation. So we needed that infrastructure earlier. And the other lesson, and this is a lesson that we've actually applied to the Cook Strait and the Eketahuna earthquakes that we've had recently, is maybe we shouldn't be there on day one. Actually, it's probably better if we wait for a month, get the logistics sorted out, and then when we go out to assess, we can let customers know when we'll be in their street, what they'll see, and we can handle all the questions in one go rather than this kind of repetitive sort of interaction that we've had for many people in Christchurch.
I think you make a very good point there. Yeah, it's you know, it's certainly something that as long as we're learning, I suppose that's a good point too.
Absolutely.
Tim, at the moment you've got 50% of the residential claims sorted.
Well,
what are the figures?
How
Where
does
are
it
you
break
sitting?
down? Well, in actual fact, we've of all the property claims in Christchurch for residential, we've actually completed 72%. So that includes the property that's damaged that EQC doesn't cover, and then we have what's called the overcap claims that we're dealing with. So of those, we're 54% through those, an additional 12% where chippies are banging in nails and buildings are going up. So 66% well underway. In fact, if you look at the state of progress at the moment, there'd probably be only about 10% of our overcap claims where people aren't already engaged in the process.
So a lot of the media, the Insurance Council and people involved in insurance are seen to be defending, delaying, that sort of thing.
No, we've heard this sort of urban myth repeated, and its credibility diminishes as time proceeds because, as you pointed out, we've settled $13 billion worth of claims, 5 billion domestic, 8 billion commercial. So that puts a lie to the fact that even if you were trying to perpetrate that myth, the facts are socially, financially, brand-wise, it's in nobody's interest to delay, deny or defend. So we're trying to move things through as quickly as possible. But, you know, as has been pointed out on numerous occasions, this was just not one quake. It was a series of quakes over 15, 18 months. We had land reassessed. We had apportionment processes, new ways of working, new challenges that came up. And this program series, I understand, is going to be dealing with some of those issues around multi-units and around land damage. So It's been a very, very complicated process. And people don't really necessarily appreciate that on a global scale.
I think actually that complication of issues is something that we are definitely going to be looking at in detail, and particularly for that, you know, last sort of dozen% or so who are really in a stuck place at the moment. Tell me, how do you work together? Because this is a very tricky thing too, and it's hard for us on the ground to understand undercap, overcap. How are you actually, you know, your two organisations merging and working together? Yeah.
Well, okay, insurers at EQC meet, well, for the best part of the last 4 years have been meeting fortnightly, more recently monthly, tackling the issues together in meetings. We're now getting other agencies of central and local government involved because the issues now are largely ones that it's over to council or it's over to central government to actually be removing the roadblocks. And the idea that it's an insurer EQC issue is far less the case these days, and it's more, well, what do we do about mass land movements in the Port Hills? What are we doing about retaining walls when City Council's got to fix retaining walls? All those sorts of issues bring in all sorts of other agencies as well. So they're part of that party as well, addressing those issues.
So Ian, yeah, how do you work with council as well? Is this an issue for you too on the ground? Is, you know, that now you're getting down to the nitty-gritty difficult cases?
So in terms of the insurance council, the insurers or the city council, sorry?
I was thinking city council.
Oh, city council.
Yeah.
So we're working on a number of different levels. I mean, for a start, there's a social housing claim that we need to finalise, but also working very closely with the council on things like increased flood vulnerability. So sharing data and modelling and information about where the land has changed and seeing if there are opportunities to work together on a solution to some of those areas. I did want to add just to what Tim said earlier around how we and the insurers are working together, and it comes back to those lessons learned and some really practical steps that we've either put in place or need to for the future. So the whole process of a joint review, where we do have a different view on a repair technique and we get together, we've invented that, and that's, you know, created that through this process, and that's now established. And then into the future, I mean, how do we make sure that we understand how the EQC Act and our cover interfaces with the insurance cover, and how do we share information, and we can train our assessors, maybe train the insurance assessors to understand that, so we get a more joined up view right from the start, rather than having to sort of work it out in front of the customer while they're waiting for things to be settled.
I think the good news for the customer is essentially that this work is carrying on in parallel, looking to the future, whilst we're also working with the present day issues in Canterbury. So if there's another natural disaster elsewhere in New Zealand, then we're working on how to better respond to that.
Great, well stick with us, because straight after the break we are going to be talking a lot more about looking into the future.